Tonight, we are going to sit with the mind that will not stop talking. The one that replays conversations you had 6 hours ago, rewrites emails you already sent, and rehearses worries about a tomorrow that has not arrived yet. But here is what no one tells you about that restless mind. It is not a problem to be solved. It is a river that has forgotten it is allowed to slow down. Tonight, you do not need to slow it down. You do not need to do anything at all. Just lie here and listen. And let these stories find you the way sleep finds you. Not by force, but by letting go. Before we begin, I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Feel free to share in the comments. And if these quiet stories help you find rest, a like or a subscribe means the world to this small channel. It helps others who cannot sleep find their way here too. Now, let us settle in together. These are not lessons to memorize. They are not teachings to study or rules to follow. They are simply stories, old and gentle stories, told in the kind of voice that asks nothing of you. There is nothing you need to understand tonight, nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to carry with you into tomorrow. If you fall asleep in the middle, that is not failure. That is the whole point. These stories will keep going, softly, like a river that does not mind whether anyone is watching. The stories you will hear tonight are drawn from the quiet wisdom of the Buddha, teachings that have helped people rest a little easier for over 2,500 years. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism to listen. You do not need to believe anything, or practice anything, or be anything other than someone who is tired, and who would like, very much, to rest. So settle in now. Let your body find its most comfortable position, the one it has been wanting to find all day. Let your shoulders drop just a little. Let your jaw unclench. Take a slow, deep breath, and as you breathe out, let the weight of this day fall from you like snow sliding off a warm roof. You do not need to carry it anymore. Not tonight. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. Let us begin. There was a woman who could not stop her mind from speaking to her. It was not a dramatic sort of speaking. There were no visions, no voices from elsewhere. It was simply her own thoughts, turning and returning like birds that could not find a place to land. She would lie down each night in the small bedroom at the back of her house, pull the quilt up to her chin, close her eyes, and wait for sleep. And within moments, sometimes within seconds, the mind would begin. She was a retired school teacher. She had spent 34 years standing in front of classrooms, explaining things clearly, answering questions patiently, keeping order among the restless and the bored. She had been good at it. Everyone said so. Her students wrote letters years later telling her she had changed their lives. But now the classrooms were gone, and the students were grown, and the house was quiet, in a way that classrooms never were. Her husband had passed 3 years earlier, not suddenly, slowly, the way autumn comes. You notice the first yellow leaf, and then one morning you look up and every branch is bare. After he died, she kept the house exactly as it was. His reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. His coat still hung by the door. She told herself she would move them eventually. She had not. The house sat at the edge of a small garden she had planted the year they moved in, back when the children were small and the afternoons felt endless. In the evenings, when the light turned amber and the air smelled of earth, and cooling stone, she would sit on the back step and watch the shadows lengthen across the grass. Crickets sang from somewhere she could never quite locate. Behind the rose bush, or under the stone wall, or perhaps from everywhere at once. The wind moved through the open kitchen window and stirred the cotton curtain in a slow, patient breath. She could smell the last of the jasmine, fading now that the season was turning. If she held her tea with both hands, she could feel the warmth move through her palms and into her wrists, and for a moment, the warmth was enough. But at night, when she lay down, the garden disappeared. The crickets fell silent beneath the louder noise inside her head, and the mind began its work. It would start with something small. A conversation with her daughter from that afternoon. Had she said the wrong thing? She replayed it. She edited it. She imagined what she should have said instead. A kinder version, a wiser version, a version that did not exist. Then, without warning, the mind would leap. The way a bird lifts from one branch and lands on another with no apparent reason. To her next doctor's appointment. To the creak in the hallway floor she kept meaning to fix. To the grocery list she had forgotten to finish. To a memory from 1987 that had no reason to surface, but surfaced anyway. She would lie there for hours. The quilt pulled tight around her, eyes closed, but mind wide open, flipping through thoughts the way someone flips through a book they have already read. Not looking for anything new, just unable to stop turning the pages. She did not know why the mind did this. She only knew it would not stop. One evening in late October, she noticed something she had not noticed before. Her neighbor, an older woman who lived alone in the blue house next door, was sitting on her porch, just sitting. No book in her lap, no phone in her hand, no knitting needles clicking, just sitting in a wooden chair with a faded cushion, looking out at the street with a stillness that seemed almost impossible. Her hands rested on the armrests the way leaves rest on water. Without effort, without weight, the retired teacher watched from her own garden for 3 evenings before she finally crossed the patch of grass between their yards and walked over. "How do you do that?" she asked. The older woman looked up. Her eyes were the color of weak tea. "Do what, dear?" "Sit like that, without," she gestured vaguely at her own head, "without the noise." The older woman smiled. There was something in the smile that was not amused, exactly, but deeply familiar, as if the question was one she had asked herself many times, in many rooms, over many years. "Come," she said, and nodded toward the empty chair beside her. "Sit." The teacher sat down. The chair creaked under her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The street was quiet. A dog barked somewhere far away, then stopped, as if it too had forgotten why it started. The sky was turning the color of ripe plums. "You think your mind is broken?" the older woman said. It was not a question. The teacher nodded slowly. "It never stops. Even when I am exhausted, even when I beg it to stop, it just keeps going." "Where does it go?" "Everywhere, nowhere. It goes to conversations I had 20 years ago. It goes to the grocery store. It goes to my daughter's childhood. It goes to things that have not happened yet, and probably never will." The older woman was quiet for a long time. A leaf detached from the maple tree above them and drifted down between their chairs, landing on the porch without a sound. "The mind is not broken," the older woman said finally. "It is simply doing what minds do. It thinks that is its work. The way the heart beats and the lungs breathe, the mind thinks. You would not be angry at your heart for beating. You would not lie awake at night, wishing your lungs would stop. But it never stops, the teacher said again. No, the older woman agreed. And it does not need to. The Buddha once described it, hard to hold down, nimble, alighting wherever it likes, the mind. Its taming is good. The mind well tamed brings ease. But taming does not mean silencing. It never meant silencing. It means watching without chasing, the way you would watch a bird in a tree, landing, lifting, landing again. You do not run after the bird. You do not try to catch it. You simply watch. And in the watching, something in you becomes very, very still. The teacher sat with this. She did not fully understand it, but she felt it. The way you feel a change in temperature before you see the clouds move. The plum-colored sky darkened to ink. The first stars appeared, faint and uncertain. The crickets started again. Their slow, pulsing song filling the space between the two women like a third presence. She realized after a while that she had not been thinking about her grocery list or her daughter or the creak in the hallway. She had simply been sitting. Her mind had not stopped. She could still hear it, faintly, like a radio playing in another room. But she was no longer sitting inside it. She was sitting beside it. "I did not do anything," she said. "Almost no," the older woman agreed gently. "You did not." After that evening, the teacher came back. Every night, after the dishes were done and the kitchen light was off, she would walk across the grass to the blue house next door and sit in the chair with the faded cushion. Sometimes they talked about small things, the weather, the price of tomatoes, a show one of them had watched. Mostly, they did not talk at all. The teacher noticed that her mind still wandered. It still replayed and planned and worried and remembered. But she was no longer angry at it for wandering. She was simply watching. The way you watch a bird that does not know it is being watched. And some nights, without trying, without forcing, without doing anything at all, the bird would land on a branch and stay. The two of them would sit there on the porch, side by side, tea growing cold in their hands, leaves falling slowly in the last light of the autumn day. Not solving anything, not fixing anything, just two women, sitting with the gentle, endless motion of their own minds, and finding, quietly, without fanfare, that it was enough. Tonight, if you are lying here, and the mind will not stop talking, replaying something someone said, rehearsing something you need to do tomorrow, circling back again and again to a worry you have circled 100 times before, you are not broken. You are not failing at sleep. You are not failing at anything. The Buddha once observed that the mind is like a monkey swinging through the trees, grabbing one branch and letting it go only to seize another. It swings all night. He did not say the monkey was wrong. He did not say the monkey should sit still. He simply named what it does. And in the naming, something shifts, because when you see the monkey clearly, when you watch it without chasing it, without scolding it, without trying to catch it and pin it down, you are no longer the monkey. You are the one watching, and the one watching is already still. This is what the old teachers on the path called papancha, the mind's tendency to take one small thought and spin it into 1,000. Not because the mind is sick or damaged or doing something wrong, but because that is what minds do, the way rivers flow and wind blows and birds fly from branch to branch. Papanka is not a disease to be cured. It is a weather pattern, and like all weather, even the storms that feel endless, it passes. There is a small pond at the edge of a village, the kind of village that does not appear on most maps, the kind where everyone knows which dog belongs to which house and which tree drops its fruit first in September. The pond is fed by a stream that comes down from the hills, carrying with it whatever the rain has loosened: silt, clay, tiny fragments of leaf and bark, and the dust of stones that have been wearing down for centuries. When the stream is rushing, the pond is cloudy. You stand at the edge and look down and see only a brown, opaque surface, like a mirror that has forgotten how to reflect. You cannot see the bottom. You cannot see the small silver fish that live there, or the smooth stones, or the roots of the water lilies that grip the mud like gentle fingers. But when the rain stops and the stream slows to a whisper, and no one stirs the water with a stick or a stone or a careless foot, something begins to happen. The silt starts to settle, not quickly, slowly, the way thoughts settle when you stop chasing them. Layer by layer, particle by particle, the water clears, and there at the bottom, the stones appear. They were always there. The water did not create them. The stillness did not produce them. They were simply waiting to be seen, and the water revealed them by doing the only thing water knows how to do when left alone. It grew still. The mind is like this pond. You do not need to filter it. You do not need to fix it, or purify it, or force it to be clear. You only need to stop stirring. The clarity was always there. Underneath the noise, underneath the silt, underneath the thousand thoughts about tomorrow and yesterday. And the thing you said wrong at dinner, it has always been there. It is waiting for you, the way the bottom of the pond waits for the silt to settle. Patiently, without urgency, without demand. In a part of the city where the streets were narrow and the buildings leaned toward each other, like old friends sharing a quiet word, there was a clock repair shop. It had been there for as long as anyone could remember. Longer than the bakery on the corner. Longer than the pharmacy with the green awning. Longer than anyone who tried to remember. The sign above the door was hand-painted in careful letters, though the paint had cracked in places where the sun had reached it year after year, giving the words a weathered look, as if the shop itself had aged alongside the clocks it held. Inside, the shop was no bigger than a bedroom, but it felt larger, somehow, because of the sound. Every wall was lined with clocks, grandfather clocks, with long brass pendulums that swung in slow arcs, pocket watches nestled in velvet cases like sleeping birds, cuckoo clocks with tiny wooden doors that no longer opened, wall clocks with Roman numerals and hands that moved. So slowly you could not see them move, only notice later that they had. The ticking of all these clocks together created a sound that was not exactly noise. It was texture. It was the sound of time being measured by 100 different hands, each keeping its own count, none of them agreeing, all of them correct. The man who owned the shop was old now. His hair had gone the color of winter light. Not white, exactly, but a pale, translucent silver that seemed to glow in the dim workshop. His hands, which had once moved with the precision of a surgeon separating nerves from tissue, had begun to slow. His fingers were thick with years and slightly bent at the knuckles, the way old trees bend toward the ground they have stood on for too long. He wore the same wool vest every day, grey, with 2 buttons missing that he never replaced. And he kept a magnifying glass on a chain around his neck, though he had not used it in months. The smell of the shop was his smell. Machine oil, old wood, cold metal, and something else. Something that might have been patience itself. He had retired 3 years ago. His son had taken over the business, rearranging the workbench in ways the old man did not approve of, but did not mention. But every morning, before the sun was fully up, before the bread truck had rattled past, or the pigeons had settled on the windowsill, the old man would walk to the shop, unlock the door with the key he had never returned, and sit down at his workbench. He did not repair anything. He had no customers of his own anymore. He simply sat. His wife asked him once, over breakfast, why he kept going. She poured his coffee the way she always did, strong, no sugar, and set it in front of him. "There is nothing for you to fix there anymore," she said. She was not unkind. She was puzzled. The way you are puzzled by someone who keeps opening a drawer they know is empty. He held the coffee with both hands. The warmth seeped into his knuckles. He thought about this for a long time. "My hands do not know what to do when they are not busy," he said finally. "And when my hands are idle, my mind fills the space. It fills it with everything. With regrets about clocks I should have repaired differently. With worries about things that do not matter. With plans for projects I will never build. I go to the shop because the ticking gives my mind something to listen to besides itself." She nodded, though he could see she did not fully understand. He did not fully understand either. He only knew that the shop was the one place where his mind grew quiet enough to breathe. But one morning, a cold morning in January, when frost had painted the shop window in patterns that looked like the inner workings of a clock, something changed. He arrived earlier than usual. The street was still dark. The bread truck had not come yet. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and sat down at the bench without turning on the lamp. The clocks ticked around him, hundreds of them, each at its own pace, creating a sound that wrapped around him like a blanket made of seconds. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Some fast, some slow, some so faint they were almost imagined. And for the first time in all the years he had sat here, he did not reach for a tool. He did not open a clock case, or adjust a spring, or wipe oil from a gear. He did not even rest his hands on the workbench. He simply sat in the dark, surrounded by the sound of time being kept by machines he had built and healed and loved. And he listened, not to the ticking, to what was between the ticking. There was a silence there, a tiny, almost invisible silence between each tick and each tock. A gap no wider than a breath, no longer than the space between one heartbeat and the next. He had never heard it before, or perhaps he had heard it 10,000 times and never noticed. The way you never notice the space between raindrops until you stop running from the rain and simply stand still. It was the kind of silence that exists only when you stop looking for it. The way stars are always in the sky, even during the day, you simply cannot see them until the noise of the light fades away and the darkness becomes a gift instead of a loss. Shunryu Suzuki, a gentle Zen teacher who spoke the way snow falls, softly, without hurry, covering everything equally, once said, "If your mind is empty, it is always ready for anything. It is open to everything. The old clockmaker had never read these words. He had never heard of Zen. He had spent his life with gears and springs and tiny screws that required a steady hand. But sitting there in his shop, in the dark, listening to the silence between the ticking, he understood something that Suzuki had understood, and the Buddha had understood. And every person who has ever stopped running long enough to hear their own heartbeat has understood that the silence was never missing. It was always here. He had simply been too busy to hear it. He sat there until the sun came in through the frosted window and laid a long rectangle of pale light across his workbench. The dust floated in the light like tiny planets drifting through a miniature universe. He watched it. He did not think about his hands or his mind, or his regrets, or the clocks he should have repaired differently. He was simply there, present, the way the dust was present, the way the light was present, the way the silence between the ticking was present, always faithfully, without asking to be noticed. When he finally stood, his knees cracking softly, he felt lighter, not because anything had been removed, but because, for a few minutes, he had stopped adding. Perhaps right now, as you hear this, you notice that there is a space between your own thoughts, not a large space, perhaps just a breath wide, a heartbeat long. But it is there. It has always been there. Between the worry and the next worry, between the memory and the next memory, between the plan and the revision of the plan, the way the silence lives between the ticking of 100 clocks, the stillness lives between your thoughts. You did not put it there. You do not need to create it, or protect it, or hold on to it. You only need to stop filling it, and perhaps, just for tonight, you can let it be. The most important thing Suzuki once said is to forget all gaining ideas, not to gain silence, not to gain stillness, not to gain peace, just to be here. Without wanting anything, without reaching for anything, without adding anything to this moment that this moment does not already contain. And if the mind starts talking again, if it picks up the grocery list, or the worry, or the conversation, or the memory from years ago that has no reason to be here, but is here anyway, that is all right. That is simply what minds do. You are not the mind. You are the one who noticed it was talking. And that quiet noticing, that gentle, effortless turning of attention, is already the beginning of something softer, something slower, something quieter than you know. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the weight of your body wherever it is resting, against the pillow, against the mattress, against whatever is holding you tonight. Notice what has begun to soften since we started this journey together. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is something else that keeps the mind from settling, something heavier than thoughts, something we carry without knowing we are carrying it. It has to do with the things we hold on to, not because they serve us, but because we have forgotten how to set them down. Take a slow breath, let it out, and let us continue. We have been sitting with the restless mind, the mind that thinks and thinks and thinks, because that is what minds do. But there is something else that keeps the mind awake at night. Something that is not a thought, exactly, but more like a weight, the kind of weight you carry so long. You forget you are carrying it, the way you forget the feeling of shoes on your feet until you take them off and feel the cool floor beneath you. It is the weight of the things we hold on to. In a house, on a quiet street, in a neighborhood where the maple trees had been growing longer than anyone had been living, there was a room that no one used anymore. It was upstairs at the end of the hall, past the bathroom with the leaking faucet and the linen closet that smelled of lavender sachets her mother had tucked between the towels years ago. The door was always closed, but never locked. The woman who lived in the house, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair she wore, pulled back and reading glasses she was always losing, would walk past this door every evening on her way to bed. And every evening she would stop. She would rest her hand on the doorknob, the brass cool under her palm. Sometimes she would open it. Sometimes she would just stand there, feeling the metal, and then walk on. The room had belonged to her daughter. Her daughter had moved across the country 14 months ago. A good job, a new apartment, a life of her own. The kind of leaving that is supposed to feel like success. And it was success. The woman knew this. She was proud. She told everyone she was proud, and she meant it. But the room was still exactly as her daughter had left it. The bed was made with the blue quilt her daughter had chosen when she was 16, the one with the tiny white stars that glowed faintly in the dark. The bookshelf still held the same paperbacks, arranged not alphabetically, but by some private system her daughter had never explained. There were photographs taped to the mirror above the dresser. Photos of friends, of a school trip, of a sunset taken from the backyard. A hairbrush sat on the nightstand with 3 strands of dark hair still caught in its bristle. The woman had not moved any of it. She told herself she was keeping it ready, in case her daughter visited, in case she came home for Christmas and wanted everything to be familiar. But somewhere deeper, in the part of herself she did not examine too closely, she knew that was not the real reason. The real reason was that if she changed the room, if she packed the books into boxes, or washed the quilt, or removed the photographs from the mirror, something would be over. Something she was not ready to let be over. Every evening she would open the door and stand in the doorway. The light from the hallway would fall across the carpet in a long yellow rectangle. She could smell, faintly, the perfume her daughter used to wear. Something floral, something young, something that was fading a little more each month. The way all scents fade when there is no one to renew them. She would stand there for a minute, sometimes 2, and then she would reach in and turn on the bedside lamp. The room would glow, and for a moment it would feel like someone was still there. Then she would turn the lamp off and close the door and go to bed, and the mind would begin its work, replaying the last phone call with her daughter, wondering if she had said too much or too little, wondering if her daughter was eating well, wondering if the distance between them was growing in ways she could not see. One afternoon in April, her oldest friend came to visit. They had known each other since their children were in preschool. Together. 30 years of shared carpools, birthday parties, late-night phone calls, and the quiet solidarity of women raising families in the same small town. Her friend's children had also grown and gone. She understood. They sat in the kitchen with cups of tea that grew cold between their hands. The afternoon light came through the window above the sink and landed on the table in a warm square. The friend noticed the closed door at the end of the hall. "Is that still?" "Yes." Her friend nodded slowly. She did not say anything for a while. She turned her teacup in her hands, feeling the warmth, watching the steam curl and disappear. "My son's room," her friend said, finally. "I kept it the same for 2 years after he left. His posters, his trophies, that terrible lamp shaped like a basketball." She smiled, but the smile had weight to it. "And then one morning, I woke up and I realized I was not keeping his room. I was keeping my grief company." The woman looked at her friend. "What did you do?" "I opened the windows. I let the air in. I did not throw anything away. I just let the room breathe. And something strange happened. When the room changed, the missing changed too. It did not go away. It just softened. It became something I carried differently, like moving a heavy bag from one shoulder to the other. The weight is the same, but suddenly you can walk again." "I am afraid," the woman said quietly, "that if I change the room, I will lose her." Her friend reached across the table and covered the woman's hand with her own. "You will not lose her. You cannot lose her. She is not in the room. She is in you. And the room," she paused, "the room is not holding her. It is holding you. It is keeping you standing in the doorway every night, looking at something that has already changed, wishing it had not." The woman did not respond, but that evening, after her friend had gone, she walked upstairs and stood at the door for the last time. She rested her hand on the knob. She opened the door. She walked to the window that had been closed for 14 months. And she opened it. The spring air came in. It smelled of cut grass and rain, and the magnolia tree that was blooming in the neighbor's yard. The curtain lifted and swayed. The blue quilt rippled slightly, as if breathing. And the room, which had been so carefully preserved, so tightly sealed, suddenly felt not empty, but open, not abandoned, but available, ready for whatever came next. She did not pack anything that night. She did not need to. She had done the only thing that mattered. She had opened the window. She had let the air in, and in doing so, she had set down something she had been carrying for 14 months, without knowing how heavy it was. What this woman discovered standing at her daughter's window with the spring air on her face is something the Buddha named a very long time ago. He said, "Whatever is not yours, let go of it. Your letting go of it will be for your long-term happiness and benefit." He was not speaking about rooms or quilts or photographs taped to mirrors. He was speaking about the way we hold on to things, tightly, fiercely, lovingly, as if holding on could stop them from changing, as if our grip could keep the world still. But the world does not stay still, and the grip, the tight, loving, exhausting grip, does not preserve what we love. It only makes our hands ache. Thich Nhat Hanh, a monk who spoke with the gentleness of someone who had seen great suffering and chosen kindness anyway, once said, "Letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness. If in our heart we still cling to anything, anger, anxiety, or possessions, we cannot be free." He was not saying that love is wrong. He was saying that love held too tightly becomes something else. It becomes a fist, and a fist, no matter how well-intentioned, cannot receive anything new. Tonight, if there is something you are holding, a version of the past you wish you could return to, a relationship you wish had ended differently, a mistake you keep turning over in your hands like a stone you cannot put down, you are not wrong for holding it. You held it because it mattered. You held it because that is what the heart does. But perhaps, just for tonight, you can loosen your grip, not let go entirely, just loosen. The way you might loosen a fist into an open palm, and notice how much lighter the hand feels when it is not clenching. In a market town where the mornings smelled of fresh bread and diesel, and the particular sweetness of fruit left out in the sun, there was a woman who had sold vegetables from the same wooden stall for 40 years. She had started when she was 23, newly married, with a baby on her hip and a borrowed table, and 3 crates of tomatoes she had grown herself. The market was busy then. 200 stalls stretching from the town square to the old stone fountain. Vendors calling prices into the morning air, customers moving through the aisles the way water moves through a riverbed, finding the path of least resistance. She learned the rhythm quickly. She learned which vegetables sold first on Mondays, which ones needed shade, how to arrange the peppers so the reds sat next to the greens, and the colors drew people in before they even knew they were hungry. Over 40 years, the stall became her. The wooden counter had been worn smooth by her hands. Thousands of transactions, millions of small touches, until the grain of the wood felt like skin. She had carved a small notch on the underside, where she rested her thumb during slow afternoons. The hand-painted sign above, her name, though the letters had faded until only the first and last were fully legible, had been repainted only once by her husband, who had better handwriting. Her husband had died 11 years ago. Her children had moved to the city. The market had been shrinking for a decade, from 200 stalls to 80, then 40, then 17. And now, a letter from the town council. The market would close at the end of the month. The building would be demolished. A shopping center would take its place. She had known it was coming. Everyone had known, but knowing something is coming and feeling it arrive are 2 very different things. The way knowing that winter is coming does not prepare you for the first morning your breath turns to fog. On the last day, she arrived at dawn. As she always had, the market was nearly empty. Most of the other vendors had already packed up and said their goodbyes during the week. But she had waited. She wanted one more morning. She stood behind her counter and ran her hands along the wood. She found the notch with her thumb. She looked at the sign above. Her name, faded, but still there. She looked at the spot on the floor where her baby had slept in a basket while she counted change. She looked at the hook where she hung her apron, and the shelf beneath the counter where she kept a thermos of tea and a photograph of her husband that no customer ever saw. She began to pack. Slowly, each item went into a cardboard box. The scale, the cash tin, the photograph, the thermos. She folded the apron and placed it on top. She unscrewed the hooks from the wall. She took down the sign, and as she lifted the last box and set it on the counter, she noticed something she did not expect. She felt lighter. Not happy. That was not the right word. But light, as if the stall, which she had loved and tended and depended upon for 40 years, had also been a weight. Not because it was bad, because she had been holding it so tightly for so long that she had forgotten what her hands felt like when they were empty. She closed the box. She walked to the market gate. She did not look back, not out of coldness, but out of a quiet understanding that looking back would not change what was behind her, and that everything she needed from this place she was already carrying. not in the box, in herself, in the roughness of her hands, in the way she could tell a ripe tomato by touch alone, in the 40 years of mornings that lived in her body, the way music lives in a musician's hands, even after the instrument is put away. She stepped into the street. The sun was warm on her face. Her hands were free. There is an old Zen story about two monks walking along a muddy road after a heavy rain. They came to a crossing where the water was deep and fast, and a young woman stood at the edge, unable to get across. Her clothes were fine, and the mud would ruin them, and the current was too strong for her to walk through alone. The older monk, without a word, lifted her onto his back, carried her across, and set her down on the other side. She thanked him and went on her way. The two monks continued walking. The younger monk said nothing for a mile, then 2 miles, then 3. His face was tight, his jaw was set, but finally he could not hold it any longer. "How could you do that?" he said. "We are monks. We are not supposed to touch a woman. You carried her on your back." The older monk looked at him calmly. "I set her down at the river," he said. "Why are you still carrying her?" This is the question, is it not? Not whether we pick things up. We all pick things up. We pick up worries and regrets and old conversations and versions of ourselves we have outgrown. We pick them up because they mattered, because they were heavy enough to feel real. But the question is, when did you set it down? And if you have not set it down, why are you still carrying it? Ajahn Chah, a Thai forest monk who lived with almost nothing and smiled, as if he had everything, said, "If you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will have complete peace." He was not asking for perfection. He was not asking you to let go of everything tonight. He was simply pointing out that peace and holding on do not live in the same hand, and that even a little letting go, even loosening the grip by a fraction, changes something. The old teachers called this weight by a name, upadana. In the original language of the Buddha, it means something surprising. It does not simply mean attachment, it means fuel. The way wood is fuel for fire. When we hold on to a grudge, to a fear, to a room we are afraid to change, to a stall we are afraid to leave, we are adding fuel to the fire of our own suffering. Not because what we love is wrong, but because the holding itself generates heat, and the heat keeps us awake. Perhaps right now, as you lie here, you can feel where your body is holding on. Perhaps it is in the shoulders, a tightness you have carried since this morning, or since last week, or since longer ago than you can remember. Perhaps it is in the hands, a fist you did not know you were making. Perhaps it is somewhere deeper, in the chest, in the belly, in the place where worry lives when it has nowhere else to go. You do not need to force it to release. You do not need to do anything. But if you simply notice it, the tightness, the grip, the holding, something in the body begins to soften on its own, not because you commanded it, but because awareness is a kind of permission, and the body, when given permission, knows how to let go. It has been waiting to let go. It has been waiting for you to stop asking it to hold. Let us rest here for a moment. Let the breath come and go without directing it. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is one more weight many of us carry, quieter than the others, harder to name. It is the weight of the things we say to ourselves when no one else is listening. The voice inside that says, "You should have been better, done more, tried harder. Tonight, we will sit with that voice and perhaps discover that it too can learn to be kind. Take a slow breath, let it out, and when you are ready, we will continue together. There is a voice that many of us know well, it not from a teacher, not from a parent, not from anyone who is still in the room. It comes from somewhere inside, and it speaks most clearly. At night, when the house is dark and the distractions have fallen away, and there is no one left to talk to except yourself, it is the voice that says, "You should have done better. You should have known. You should have been more patient, more present, more careful, more kind." It is the voice that replays your worst moments with perfect clarity while your best moments fade into fog. It is the voice of self-judgment, and for many of us, it never learned how to be gentle. In a kitchen that smelled of strong coffee and bread, just beginning to brown in the oven, an older woman sat alone at a wooden table. The table was old, older than her marriage, older than her children, brought from her mother's house when her mother could no longer live alone. There were knife marks in the surface, small grooves where decades of chopping had left their record. She could run her finger along them and feel the history of meals she had made, holidays she had hosted, arguments that had happened over soup, apologies that had happened over tea. It was early autumn. The light through the kitchen window was golden and low. The kind of light that makes ordinary things look important. A glass of water, a folded napkin, the curve of a spoon. The refrigerator hummed its low, constant note from somewhere outside. She could hear a neighbor's wind chimes, 5 soft tones that never played the same melody twice. The house was quiet in the way that only a house where children once lived can be quiet. Not empty, exactly, but remembering fullness. Her children were grown and scattered. One in another state, 2 in other cities. One she spoke to less often than she wished. Her grandchildren came when they could, which was not as often as it used to be. The mornings were hers now, entirely, and she had not yet decided whether that was a gift or a punishment. She held her coffee cup with both hands, the way she always did, wrapping her fingers around the ceramic until the heat moved into her palms and up through her wrists. The ceramic was smooth, except for a small chip near the rim that she felt each time she drank. The coffee was strong and black. She had made it the same way for 40 years. Some things do not change because we choose not to change them. Some things do not change because they are the last things we have that still feel like ourselves. But at night, the kitchen disappeared and the coffee was hours away, and the voice came. It came with a list, a long, detailed, impeccably organized list of every time she had failed. The time she had yelled at her youngest for spilling juice on the carpet. He was 4, just 4, and she could still see his face crumple like paper. The school play she had missed because a meeting ran late. Her daughter had looked for her in the audience and not found her, and had smiled anyway, which was somehow worse than crying. The years she had worked too much and been home too little. The birthday she had forgotten. Not a child's birthday, her own mother's, and the silence on the phone afterward had lasted 3 days. The things she had said in anger that she could not unsay. The things she had not said at all. The I love yous that got lost in the rush of packing lunches and signing permission slips and driving to soccer practice and falling into bed too exhausted to speak. The list was long. The voice was thorough. And the worst part was that every item on the list was true. She had done those things. She had been that person. She could not argue with the evidence. One Saturday morning, her youngest granddaughter came to visit. She was 9 years old, with tangled hair and a gap where her front tooth used to be, and the kind of energy that fills a room the way sunlight fills a jar. She sat at the kitchen table and ate toast with jam, strawberry, always strawberry, and swung her feet because they did not reach the floor. Her shoes were untied. She had a smudge of purple marker on her cheek. "Grandma," she said, her mouth full of toast, "you are the best grandma in the whole world." The woman smiled. "You are sweet to say that." "No, I mean it. Mum says you are the strongest person she knows. She says you held everything together when nobody else could." The woman looked at her granddaughter. The child's eyes were clear and certain, the way only a child's eyes can be, unclouded by the complicated arithmetic of guilt and regret that adults carry like stones in their pockets. "I was not always good at it," the woman said quietly. She set her coffee cup down. "There were times I was not patient enough, times I was not there when I should have been." "Like when?" The girl looked genuinely puzzled, as if the idea of her grandmother failing at anything was as strange as snow in July. "Like, many times. I made mistakes. I lost my temper. I missed things that mattered." The girl considered this for a moment, chewing her toast. Then she shrugged. Not dismissively, but with the easy wisdom that children sometimes carry before the world teaches them to doubt it. "Everybody makes mistakes, Grandma. That does not mean you are not the best. I am not sure I was enough." The girl tilted her head the way a bird does when it hears a sound it does not understand. "But you are enough," she said, as if stating something obvious, like the sky is blue or bread needs butter. "You are Grandma. That is already everything." The woman felt something shift in her chest. Not a dramatic shift, not a crack or a break, more like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for years. She thought of something she had once heard. Words from Pema Chodron, a Buddhist teacher, whose voice had come to her through a podcast during a long drive on an empty highway. Having compassion starts and ends with having compassion for all those unwanted parts of ourselves. The healing comes from letting there be room for all of this to happen. Room for grief, for relief, for misery, for joy. She had made room for everyone else's grief. She had held space for her children's mistakes, her husband's moods, her friends' crises, her students' struggles. She had never once turned that holding toward herself. She had never said to herself what she would have said to any student, any friend, any stranger who came to her door in pain. "You did your best. It was enough. You are allowed to rest now." After her granddaughter left, after the jam was wiped from the table, and the dishes were washed and the small purple marker smudge was cleaned from the table's edge where she had leaned, the woman sat in her kitchen chair and did not move. She held the empty coffee cup. The light had shifted from gold to white. The wind chimes outside played their quiet, random song. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not replay the list. Not because the list was gone, but because, for this one morning, she chose to set it down. The way you set down a bag you have carried so long your shoulder has a groove in it. Tonight, if there is a voice inside you that keeps a list, a careful, merciless list of every time you fell short, every word you wish you could take back, every moment you were not the person you wanted to be. Know this: you are not the only one who hears that voice. It speaks to almost everyone. And it speaks loudest at night, when the defenses are down and the house is dark, and there is nothing between you and the memory of who you were at your worst. But you are not your worst moment. You are not the sum of your mistakes. You are not the list. The Buddha once offered this gentle reminder: you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection, not after you have earned it, not after you have fixed everything, not after you have become the perfect version of yourself that the voice keeps insisting you should be. Now, tonight, lying here, as you are, there is an old story. No one knows exactly where it comes from, only that it has been told in many villages, in many languages, for a very long time, about a clay bowl with a crack running down its side. The bowl belonged to a water carrier who walked each morning from the river to the house of an old woman who could no longer make the journey herself. He carried 2 bowls on a wooden pole across his shoulders, one perfect, one cracked. The perfect bowl delivered a full portion of water every time. The cracked bowl arrived only half full, a thin trail of water dripping from its side along the dusty path. The cracked bowl was ashamed. It apologized to the water carrier every morning. "I am sorry," it said. "I am broken. I cannot hold what I am given. I lose half of everything along the way. You would be better off without me." One morning, the water carrier stopped walking. He set the pole down gently and knelt beside the cracked bowl. "Look behind you," he said. The bowl looked, and there, along the side of the path where the water had dripped, day after day, month after month, for as long as the crack had existed, wild flowers had grown. A ribbon of color, stretching all the way from the river to the old woman's door, blues and yellows and tiny white blossoms that trembled in the wind like small bells ringing. "You see," the water carrier said, "I knew about your crack from the very beginning. So I planted seeds on your side of and every day, without knowing it, you watered them. The crack is not your flaw. It is the reason the flowers exist." The bowl said nothing, but if a clay bowl could weep, and if those tears could water something, one imagines that even more flowers would have grown, not from perfection, but from the beautiful, tender act of being broken and still showing up every morning to carry what it could. In a garden behind a small house, the kind of house that leans slightly to one side, as if it has been leaning into the wind for so many years that it has forgotten how to stand straight, an older woman knelt in the dirt. Her hands were rough from years of turning soil, her nails permanently darkened with earth. No amount of scrubbing could fully remove. Her knuckles swollen in the way that comes from doing the same tender, demanding work for decades. She wore a wide-brimmed hat that cast a circle of shade around her face, and she moved slowly, deliberately, the way people move when they have stopped racing against time and have begun, instead, to move with it. The garden was large for one person. Larger than she needed, certainly. But she had never been able to bring herself to let any part of it go fallow. There were roses along the fence, their petals heavy with the last heat of August. Tomato plants staked with bamboo, their leaves giving off that sharp green smell when she brushed against them. lavender in neat rows near the back gate, humming with bees in the afternoon, and beneath everything, the dark, rich earth that smelled like something's between rain and bread. The smell of things breaking down and becoming new. Her husband had died 5 years ago, a heart attack, sudden and complete, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. He had been reading in the living room, a history book she remembered, with a red cover. She'd been in this garden, on her knees in the dirt, pruning the roses that grew along the eastern fence. She remembered the exact quality of the light, golden, slanting, warm, on the back of her neck. She remembered the feeling of the pruning shears in her hand, the clean snap of each cut. By the time she came inside, her hands still smelling of roses and earth, he was gone. And in the 5 years since, a single thought had taken root in her mind, the way bindweed takes root in a garden, silently, persistently, strangling everything it touches. She should have known. She should have seen the signs. The shortness of breath he dismissed. The fatigue he blamed on age. The color in his face that was not quite right. She should have made him go to the doctor sooner. She should have insisted. She should have been inside instead of outside, in the living room instead of the garden, beside him instead of beside the roses. She should have been there every night, lying in the bed that was now too wide and too quiet for one person. This thought would return. It would arrive like a visitor who does not knock, simply opens the door and sits down in the chair by the bed and stays. She would lie in the dark, the cotton sheets cool against her skin, and replay that Tuesday. She would rearrange the details the way she rearranged flowers in a vase, moving this here, moving that there, trying to find an arrangement that changed the ending. She would construct alternate timelines in which 5 minutes made the difference, in which her presence in the room could have changed the outcome. She knew that it would not have. The doctors had said so. Her children had said so. Her friends had said so. But knowing something in the mind and knowing it in the body are two different kinds of knowing. And her body still believed every night that if she had only been inside, everything would be different. The garden was her refuge, not because it distracted her from the thought, but because the garden understood something about loss and growth that people struggled to put into words. The garden did not try to fix things. It did not offer reassurance. It did not say, "It was not your fault," the way well-meaning friends did, in voices that made her feel worse because she could not believe them. The garden simply grew. It turned dead leaves into soil. It turned soil into roots. It turned roots into flowers. It did not ask permission. It did not need to be convinced. One afternoon, late in August, when the heat was beginning to break and the light had that particular amber quality that signals the turning of the season, she was pruning a rose bush near the back fence. She had been pruning harder than she usually did. She was not thinking about the roses. She was thinking about the Tuesday, and her hands, following her thoughts, were cutting too deep. She stepped back. The rose bush looked bare and startled, stripped of its leaves, its flowers gone, nothing left but the rough brown wood and a few thorns. She had cut it nearly to the ground. She stared at it, and something settled into place. Not with a crash, but with the quiet click of a latch catching on a gate you thought was locked. She had been doing this to herself for 5 years, She had been pruning herself with blame, cutting away at her own kindness, stripping herself of forgiveness, leaving nothing but the bare wood of guilt, thorny, exposed, unable to bloom. And just like the rosebush, she could not grow back when she was cut this close to the ground. Pema Chodron, a Buddhist teacher who had known her own share of loss, once said, "Meditation practice is not about trying to throw ourselves away and become something better. It is about befriending who we are already." The gardener did not meditate. She did not read Buddhist books. But kneeling there in the dirt, looking at the stripped rosebush, she understood this in her hands, in her aching knees, in the smell of earth and roses and August heat. She had been trying to throw herself away. The version of herself that had been in the garden instead of the living room, the version that had not seen, the version that was human and imperfect and in the wrong place at the moment that mattered most. And throwing that version away had not brought her husband back. It had only made the garden of her own life smaller and harder and more bare. She put down the pruning shears. She pressed her hands flat against the earth, cool and damp and alive beneath her palms. She felt the dirt between her fingers and the warmth of the late sun on her shoulders and the slight ache in her knees that meant she had been kneeling too long. And she made a decision that was not really a decision, but more of a surrender. The kind where you stop fighting something that was never your enemy. She would let the rosebush grow back. It would take time. It would be messy and uneven and imperfect, but it would grow, and she would let herself grow back too. Not the version of herself that could go back in time and change that Tuesday, but the version that was here, now, in the dirt, with soil under her nails and grief in her chest, and the first green tendril of something that might, in time, become forgiveness. The evening light fell through the leaves and made small golden coins on the dirt around her knees. A bird sang from the fence, one clear, unhurried note, then another, then a pause that was as much a part of the song as the notes themselves. Her hands were covered in earth, and her heart was full of something that was not yet peace, but was perhaps the first breath before peace, fragile, reaching toward the light the way all growing things reach, without knowing where the light comes from, only that it is there. The old teachers had a word for what both of these women, the grandmother in the kitchen and the gardener in the dirt, were beginning to discover. They called it metta. In the ancient language of the Buddha, it means loving kindness, but metta is often misunderstood. People hear it and think it means being kind to others, to strangers, to neighbors, to the difficult people at the edge of your life. And it does mean that, but it begins somewhere closer. It begins with you, with the unwanted parts, with the list, with the version of yourself you are most ashamed of. Metta begins by turning toward that version and saying, not "you are forgiven," because that may be too much to ask tonight, but simply, "You are here, and I will not look away." Perhaps, as you lie here tonight, something in you has already begun to soften toward yourself, not because you decided to soften, the way you cannot decide to fall asleep. You cannot decide to be kind to yourself by force, but because the stories have been doing their quiet work, the way rain softens earth without the earth having to try. Perhaps the voice with the list has grown a little quieter, not gone, but speaking from a greater distance, like someone calling from across a field. Perhaps the grip of self-judgment has loosened by a fraction. And if you can feel that loosening, even slightly, even for just this breath, that is metta. That is the practice. It is already happening inside you. You do not need to do anything more. Let us rest here. Let the breath come and go on its own. Notice how the body feels right now. Heavier, perhaps, than when we began. Softer, perhaps. That heaviness is not exhaustion. It is the body remembering what it feels like to stop holding itself so tightly. When you are ready, we will continue together. The mind that judges itself, the mind that keeps the list and reads it back every night, often runs because it believes something very simple and very painful. It believes it is not enough, that there is always one more thing to fix, one more mistake to correct, one more version of itself that it must become before it is allowed to rest. But what if that belief is the last weight to set down? What if enough is not a place you arrive at, but a truth you have been standing on all along? Take a slow breath, and as you breathe out, notice, just for a moment, that you are here, that you have made it to this point in the night, that whatever the day asked of you, it is over now. There is a question the mind asks over and over that sounds reasonable, but is actually a kind of trap. The question is, what else should I be doing? It comes at night, when the body is still and the room is dark and there is nothing left on the schedule. It comes as a restlessness, a nagging feeling that you are forgetting something, that there is one more task, one more email, one more problem to solve before you are allowed to rest. The mind runs and runs because somewhere deep inside it believes that it has not done enough, that you have not done enough, that resting is something you must earn, and you have not yet earned it. Thich Nhat Hanh, a monk who walked slowly through a world that was always in a hurry, once said, "We will be more successful in all our endeavors if we can let go of the habit of running all the time and take little pauses to relax and recenter ourselves. And we will also have a lot more joy in living." He was not talking about laziness. He was talking about the difference between running because the road requires it and running because you have forgotten how to stop. There is an old Zen story about a university professor who visited a Japanese master to learn about Zen. The master invited him to sit down and poured him tea. He poured and poured, and the tea rose to the brim of the cup, and still he kept pouring. The tea spilled over the rim, across the table, onto the floor. The professor watched, alarmed. "The cup is full," he said. "No more will go in." The master set down the teapot and looked at him. "Like this cup," he said, "you are full of your own opinions, your own plans, your own ideas about what you need and what you lack. How can I show you anything until you first empty your cup?" The professor sat in silence. He had come to the master's house carrying a lifetime of knowledge, degrees, publications, conferences, awards. He had come to add Zen to the collection, the way you might add a new book to an already overflowing shelf. And the master, with one overflowing cup, had shown him that the shelf was the problem. The mind that cannot sleep is often like this cup, so full of what it thinks it needs, what it thinks it lacks, what it thinks it must still accomplish, that there is no room left for rest. Rest is not something you add to a full life. It is something that appears when you stop filling. In a house where the walls were painted a soft white that glowed in the morning light, a woman sat on her living room sofa on a Monday morning and did not know what to do with herself. This was new. For 31 years, Monday mornings had been the same. Alarm at 5:45, shower, coffee in a travel mug, the drive to the office with the news on low, the parking garage that smelled of concrete and exhaust, the elevator to the 14th floor, the desk by the window, where she could see the tops of the oak trees in the park across the street. She had been a regional director, a title that meant she was responsible for 200 people, 4 offices, and a budget that had more digits than her phone number. She had been good at it. She had been very good at it. She had won awards that sat in a box in the closet because she had never found a place to display them that did not feel like boasting. But last Friday had been her last day. There had been a cake, vanilla, which she did not particularly like, but smiled about anyway. There had been a speech from her boss, who called her irreplaceable, and then, in the same breath, introduced her replacement. There had been a card signed by people she had worked with for decades, their handwriting familiar as family. And then she had driven home, and the parking garage smell had faded from her clothes, and the alarm had not gone off this morning. And now she was sitting on a sofa that she had owned for 12 years, but had never sat on at 9 o'clock on a Monday. The house was quiet in a way she had never experienced during a weekday. No phone buzzing with messages, no calendar alerts, no emails arriving with their small, insistent chimes, just the clock on the wall. Tick, 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 and the hum of the refrigerator, and a bird outside the window, singing something she had never had time to hear before. The sofa cushion held her weight in a way that felt unfamiliar, as if the sofa itself was surprised to find her there. At this hour, she held a cup of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, her fingers wrapped around the ceramic out of habit rather than in warmth. She did not know who she was if she was not working. That was the thought that kept circling. Not a dramatic thought, not despair, not crisis, just a quiet, persistent confusion, like a bird flying into a window it cannot see. For 31 years, her identity had been built on what she produced. Decisions made, problems solved, people managed, outcomes delivered. She was someone who did things, and now, sitting on this sofa on this quiet Monday, she was someone who was not doing anything. And the mind could not tolerate the emptiness. It kept generating lists, things she could organize, closets she could clean, volunteer work she could sign up for, classes she could take. The mind wanted to fill the space the way water wants to fill a hole. It did not know that the space itself might be the gift. Her older sister called that afternoon. Her sister had retired 10 years earlier, a teacher 55 years old, and she had simply stopped one June and never gone back. The woman had always admired this about her sister and also not understood it. How do you just stop? How are you doing? Her sister asked. I do not know what to do with myself, the woman said. She was surprised by how honest this sounded. She had not planned to say it. Her sister laughed, not unkindly. Of course you do not. You have been doing for 31 years. You do not know how to just be. Is it not boring? At first, terrifying. I sat at my kitchen table for 3 weeks and felt like I was disappearing. Like if I was not grading papers or planning lessons, I did not exist. What changed? Her sister was quiet for a moment. The woman could hear her breathing. Slow, unhurried. The breath of someone who had learned to take her time. One morning, her sister said, "I was sitting in the garden, doing nothing. Literally nothing. Just sitting. And I realized I was not bored. I was not anxious. I was not planning. I was just there. And I thought, oh, this is what I have been running from my whole life. This moment. This ordinary, empty, perfect moment where nothing is required of me. And I am still here. I am still whole. I did not disappear. But how did you know you had done enough? Oh, sweetheart." Her sister's voice was tender in a way that made the woman's eyes sting. "You have done enough. You have always done enough. You just never believed it. None of us do. We keep running because we think enough is somewhere ahead of us. One more promotion, one more project, one more year. But it is not ahead. It is behind you. It is under you. You are standing on it right now." The woman sat on her sofa after the call ended. The tea was cold. The clock ticked. The bird outside had moved on, and for the first time in 31 years of Monday mornings, she sat still, truly still, and did not reach for anything. Not her phone, not a list, not a plan. She just sat with the quiet, and the quiet sat with her, and neither of them needed the other to be anything else. Ajahn Chah, a forest monk who owned almost nothing and seemed to need even less, once said, "Happiness and suffering do not depend on being poor or rich. They depend on having the right or wrong understanding in our mind. The right understanding is not complicated. It is simply this, that you are enough, that this moment is enough, that the breath you are breathing right now is enough. The wrong understanding is the one the mind repeats at 3 in the morning. That you should be doing more, should have done more, should be more. Tonight, how many of those thoughts are with you? How many lists is the mind running through? Things still undone, calls still unmade, problems still unsolved. And what if, just for now, you set those lists aside? Not forever, just for tonight. The way the woman on the sofa set her cold tea down and discovered that her hands, when they were not holding anything, did not feel empty. They felt free. At the edge of a lake where the water was so still in the early morning that it looked like a second sky laid flat upon the earth, an old man sat in a wooden boat and waited. He had been a fisherman all his life, not a commercial fisherman, not the kind with large boats and crews and contracts. A small fisherman, one boat, one net, one lake. He had lived in the same house, on the same shore, for 63 years. And the house had aged the way he had aged, slowly, unevenly, with a beauty that came not from maintenance, but from use. The paint had peeled and been repainted so many times that the walls had the texture of a riverbed. The wooden dock, where he tied his boat, was grey with weather. The boards, worn smooth by his bare feet over decades until they felt like skin. The morning was early, so early that the sun had not yet cleared the hills on the far side of the lake. The sky was the color of a pearl, shifting between grey and pink and the faintest gold. Mist rose from the water in long, slow ribbons that twisted and dissolved like thoughts you cannot quite hold on to. The air smelled of lake water, that mineral, green, slightly sweet smell that is unlike any other smell in the world, and of the wet wood of his boat, and of the coffee he had poured from a thermos into a metal cup that he held between his palms. His hands were extraordinary. Not beautiful, functional. The knuckles were swollen, the skin rough and dark from sun, the nails trimmed short and permanently stained by fish scales and rope fiber. They were hands that knew every knot a fisherman needs. Hands that could tell the weight of a catch by the pull of the line. Hands that had been doing the same work for so long that the work had become part of the body, the way a river becomes part of the land. It flows through. His grandson had come to visit, a young man from the city, 24, recently graduated, working at a technology company that made things the old man did not understand and did not need to understand. The grandson had arrived the night before, restless and distracted, checking his phone every few minutes, talking about career paths and salary negotiations and stock options and things that sounded to the old man like a foreign language spoken at a speed that made his head ache. This morning, the grandson had woken early, not by choice, but because the birds here were louder than the traffic he was used to, and had walked down to the dock where his grandfather was already sitting in the boat. "Can I come?" the grandson asked. The old man nodded. He did not ask why, he simply made room. They sat in the boat together as the mist lifted. The grandson was fidgeting, bouncing his knee, looking around, reaching for his phone, and remembering he had left it in the house. The old man cast his line and waited. The line made a small arc in the air, caught the light for a moment, and landed on the water without a sound. "Grandpa," the grandson said, after 20 minutes of silence that felt, to him, like 20 hours. "Do you ever feel like you missed out? You have been here your whole life. The same lake, the same house. Do you not wonder what else is out there?" The old man did not answer immediately. He watched the line. He watched the mist dissolve. He took a sip of coffee from the metal cup. "What is out there?" he asked. "Everything," the grandson said. "Cities, opportunities, experiences, the world." The old man nodded slowly. He reeled in the line, not because a fish had bitten, but because the motion itself was a kind of thinking. He cast again. The line asked, the water received it. "When I was your age," the old man said, "I thought the same thing. I thought the lake was too small. I thought the life was too simple. I thought there must be more." He paused. "And then, one morning, I was maybe 30, 35. I came out here at dawn, and the mist was like this, and the water was like this, and I could smell the wood and the coffee and the lake. And something in me stopped looking for more. Not because I gave up, because I realized I was already standing inside it. The more. It was here. It was always here." Dogen, a Zen master who lived 800 years ago and wrote with the precision of a watchmaker and the tenderness of a poet, once said, "If you want to travel the way of Buddhas and Zen masters, then expect nothing, seek nothing, and grasp nothing." The old fisherman had never read Dogen, but sitting in his boat at dawn, with the mist dissolving and the line in the water and the coffee warm between his palms, he was living what Dogen had written, not seeking, not grasping, not expecting anything more than this. And in that not seeking, he had found something that his grandson, with all his opportunities and ambitions and stock options, was still searching for. The grandson was quiet for a long time after that. He watched the water. He watched his grandfather's hands, the way they held the line, the way they rested on the line, the way they rested on the gunwale, the way they moved with a confidence that came not from success, but from repetition, from showing up every morning for 60 years and doing the same thing with the same attention and the same care. After a while, without deciding to, the grandson stopped bouncing his knee. He stopped looking toward the house where his phone was. He sat in the boat and breathed the lake air and let the morning happen to him without trying to manage it or optimize it or extract something useful from it. And the old man, noticing this, smiled, but did not say anything. Some things do not need to be named. They only need to be felt. The old teachers had a word for what the fisherman carried in his bones without knowing its name. They called it santuti, contentment. But the word is often misunderstood. People hear contentment and think it means settling, accepting less, giving up on wanting more. But santuti does not mean accepting less. It means recognizing that you already have enough. The difference is vast. One is scarcity wearing a mask of peace. The other is abundance that has stopped pretending it needs to be somewhere else. Perhaps right now, lying here, you already have enough. Not in the way the world measures enough. Not enough money, or enough success, or enough accomplishments, but enough in the way the fisherman meant it. Enough air in this breath, enough warmth in this bed, enough quiet in this room. Perhaps the mind has been so busy running through lists of what is missing that it has not noticed what is here. And what is here? This breath, this moment, this body resting, this voice keeping you company in the dark might be, if you let it, more than enough. If you notice your hands right now, wherever they are resting, on the pillow, on the blanket, beside you, folded on your chest, you might notice that they are not reaching for anything. They are not gripping. They are not holding a phone or a pen or a steering wheel or any of the 100 things they held today. They are simply resting. And that resting, that not reaching, that not grasping, is what santuti feels like in the body. You are already doing it. You have been doing it since you lay down. The practice is already happening. Let us rest here for a moment. Let the breath come and go. Feel the weight of the body settling deeper into whatever is holding you tonight. When you are ready, we will continue together. The mind holds on to things because it is afraid of what will happen if it lets go. It holds on to worries because it believes worrying keeps bad things from happening. It holds on to regrets because it believes remembering mistakes will prevent future ones. It holds on to plans because it believes the future can be controlled. But there is a truth the mind resists, a gentle, ancient truth, that nothing we hold on to stays the same, and that the letting go we fear the most might be the very thing that sets us free. Take a slow breath, let it out, and notice for just a moment that this breath was different from the last one. Not dramatically different, but different. A little deeper perhaps, a little slower. The body is changing, breath by breath, even as you lie still. Everything changes. This is the truth the mind resists most fiercely at night. The truth that nothing we hold on to stays the same. Not the people we love, not the bodies we live in, not the thoughts we think, not even the worry that feels so permanent at 3 in the morning. Everything is moving, everything is shifting, and the mind, lying awake in the dark, tries to stop the motion by thinking about it, as if reviewing the change one more time could prevent it from happening. But there is another way to meet this truth. A gentler way, and it begins with a woman who learned it not from a book, but from her mother's hand. In a small room at the end of a hallway, in a house that smelled of lavender and medicine, and the faint sweetness of talcum powder, a woman sat beside her mother's bed. The room was dim. A bedside lamp with a cloth shade cast a circle of amber light that reached the edge of the bed and no further, as if the light itself understood that some things are better held close. On the wall above the dresser hung a row of photographs. Her parents' wedding, her own christening, a family vacation at a lake she could no longer name, her children as toddlers in matching overalls. The photographs were slightly crooked, the way photographs become when no one straightens them anymore. And the glass was dusty in the corners. They looked like windows into rooms that still existed somewhere. If only you could find the door. Her mother lay in the bed, small now, smaller than seemed possible for a woman who had once carried grocery bags up 3 flights of stairs without stopping, who had lifted children onto her hip with one arm and stirred soup with the other, who had filled every room she entered with a voice that could comfort and command in the same sentence. She was 87. Her hair, spread across the pillow, was white as the cotton it rested on. Her hands lay on top of the blanket, thin, veined, the knuckles swollen, the skin so translucent that the woman could see the blue tracery of blood moving beneath it, slow and faithful. The mother had dementia. It had come the way weather comes to a coast, slowly at first, small signs you could explain away. Then all at once, a storm that rearranged everything. First it was names, then it was faces, then it was the difference between morning and night, between the kitchen and the bathroom, between the daughter who visited every day and the stranger who sat in the chair beside the bed. The woman came every evening. She would drive from her own house, 20 minutes through streets she knew by heart, and sit in this chair and hold her mother's hand and talk. She talked about the weather, about the garden, about what she had cooked for dinner, about the neighbor's new dog. Her mother listened, or seemed to listen, with eyes that were sometimes clear and sometimes clouded, the way a pond is sometimes clear and sometimes not. Tonight, her mother did not know who she was. This happened more often now. The woman would walk in, and her mother would look at her with a polite, pleasant expression. The expression you give a kind stranger, and say, "Hello, are you the nurse?" "No, Mama, it is me. It is your daughter." Her mother would nod agreeably, the way you nod when someone says something that does not quite make sense, but you do not want to be rude. And the woman would sit down and take her mother's hand and swallow the grief that rose in her throat like water rising behind a dam. She had read about this. She had spoken to doctors. She understood, intellectually, that the disease was erasing her mother's memory, the way rain erases chalk on a sidewalk. Slowly, unevenly, leaving fragments that made the absence of the rest more painful. She understood that it was no one's fault, that there was nothing she could have done, that the mother she remembered was still in there, somewhere, beneath the fog. But, at night, lying in her own bed, the understanding vanished, and the overthinking began. Will she remember me tomorrow? What if today was the last time? What if the last clear moment has already passed, and I did not know it was the last? The mind replayed every visit, searching for signs. Was that a flicker of recognition? Was that smile meant for me? Or for anyone who happened to sit in the chair? Am I losing her? Or have I already lost her? Tonight the woman sat in the chair and did not speak. She held her mother's hand. The hand was warm and light, like holding a small bird. She could feel the pulse, slow, steady, the rhythm of a body that was still here, still faithful. Even as the mind inside it wandered in places no one else could follow. Her mother turned her head on the pillow and looked at her. There was no recognition in the eyes, not the kind that says, "I know your name, I know your history, I know the day you were born." But there was something else, something older than names. The mother smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that comes not from knowing but from feeling. The way an infant smiles at warmth, at comfort, at the simple presence of another person who is near and gentle and not going anywhere. And the woman realized, in that moment, with the amber light and the dusty photographs and the pulse beneath her fingers, that love does not require memory, that the connection between them had not been erased. It had changed shape, like water that becomes ice, then mist, then rain, then river. It was still water. It was still love. It was simply wearing a different form tonight. She squeezed her mother's hand. Her mother squeezed back, lightly, the way a child squeezes when it does not know why, but knows it should. And, for the first time in months, the woman did not go home and lie awake wondering what would be lost by morning. She went home and lay in the dark and thought about what remained. Dogen, a Zen master who lived 800 years ago and saw the world with the clarity of still water, wrote, "Your body is like a dewdrop on the morning grass. Your life is as brief as a flash of lightning, momentary and vain. It is lost in a moment." He was not trying to frighten anyone. He was trying to wake them up, to say, "Look, this is here now. This hand holding yours, this breath, this light. It will not be here in this exact way again." And that is not a tragedy. That is what makes it sacred. The word the old teachers used was anicca, impermanence, and it is perhaps the most misunderstood teaching the Buddha ever offered. People hear impermanence and think it means loss. They think it means everything beautiful will be taken away, and so they resist it. They hold on tighter. They lie awake at night, trying to stop the river from flowing. But Pema Chodron, who has spent a lifetime sitting with difficult truths, said it differently. Impermanence is a principle of harmony. When we do not struggle against it, we are in harmony with reality. She was saying that impermanence is not the enemy. It is the music. It is the reason the song is beautiful, because it ends. It is the reason this moment matters, because it will not come again. And the resistance to it, the clinging, the overthinking, the lying awake trying to hold the river still, that is not love. That is fear, wearing love's clothing. The worry you carried into bed tonight is also impermanent. The thought that feels so permanent, so fixed, so absolutely real at this hour. It is moving. It is already changing. By tomorrow, it will have shifted. By next week, it may be gone entirely, replaced by a different worry that will feel just as permanent and just as urgent. This is not a flaw in the design. This is the design. And when you see it, when you truly see that even your suffering is passing through, something in the chest loosens. Not because the suffering stops, but because you stop believing it will last forever. In a small town where the rooftops were red clay and the streets were narrow enough that neighbors could pass bowls of soup from window to window, there was a woman who had been sewing for 50 years. Her workshop was a single room at the front of her house, with a wide window that let in the afternoon light, the kind of light that seamstresses love, clear and angled, the kind that reveals every thread and every flaw. The room smelled of fabric, cotton, linen, wool, the occasional silk that came in for a wedding dress or a christening gown, and of the hot metal of the iron that sat on its board in the corner, always ready, always slightly too warm. There was a smell beneath that too, the oil she used on the sewing machine. A machine so old, it had a name no one could read anymore because the brass plate had been polished smooth by decades of her sleeve brushing against it. Her hands told the story of her craft. The fingers were thin and precise, bent slightly inward from years of guiding fabric beneath the needle. The tips were calloused in small, specific places. The pad of the right thumb, the side of the left index finger, where the needle and the scissors made contact most often. Her fingernails were short, filed straight across, because long nails and sewing do not agree. There was a scar on the inside of her left palm, where a needle had gone through when she was 20, and learning to work without looking down. She could still feel the needle sometimes, on cold days. A small, sharp ghost. She had sewn for everyone, wedding dresses and funeral suits, school uniforms and baptism gowns, curtains for kitchens and cushion covers for rocking chairs, patches on work trousers and invisible men's on silk blouses. She knew the measurements of half the town by heart. She could see a woman walking down the street and know, without measuring, that her shoulders had broadened, or her waist had narrowed, or she was carrying a child she had not yet announced. But now, her hands trembled. It had started 2 years ago, a slight unsteadiness, barely noticeable, like a compass needle that cannot quite find north. She ignored it. Then the tremor deepened. The straight lines she was famous for began to waver. The stitches she could once sew in her sleep, tiny even invisible, began to show. Customers did not complain, but she could see it. She could see every imperfect stitch, the way a musician can hear every wrong note that the audience does not notice. She began to doubt herself. She slowed down. She took fewer orders. She sat at her machine some mornings and simply stared at the fabric, her hands hovering above it, afraid to begin, because beginning meant seeing the tremor again, and seeing the tremor meant facing something she was not ready to face, that the body she had depended on for 50 years was changing, and there was nothing she could do to change it back. One autumn afternoon, a woman brought in a coat for mending. It was an old coat, brown wool, heavy, with wooden buttons, and a lining that had worn through at the elbows. It smelled of mothballs and cedar and someone else's life. The customer said it had been her mother's coat and her grandmother's before that, and she would like the lining replaced if possible. The seamstress laid the coat on her work table and opened it. Inside she found something that stopped her hands from shaking. Not the fabric, but the stitches. Layers of stitches, decades of repairs, each one in a different hand. Her grandmother's stitches, long and confident, the stitches of someone who sewed quickly because there were children to feed and no time to be careful. Her mother's stitches, shorter, neater, the stitches of someone who had been taught well and taken pride in the teaching, and scattered among them a few of her own, from a repair she had done 20 years ago and forgotten. She stared at the layers. 3 generations of hands, all imperfect, all temporary, all leaving their mark on the same piece of cloth. Her grandmother's hands were gone now. Her mother's hands were gone, and her own hands, trembling, uncertain, afraid, would someday be gone too. But the coat was still here, and the stitches, each one a small, imperfect record of care, were still holding. She sat down at her machine. She threaded the needle. Her hands trembled, and the first stitch was not straight. But she kept going. Not because the tremor had stopped, because she had stopped being afraid of it. If every stitch was temporary, if every seamstress's hands would someday still, then the only stitch that mattered was the one she was making right now. And that stitch, trembling or not, was hers. She sewed the lining slowly. Every stitch showed, every stitch wavered, and every stitch was, in its own imperfect way, beautiful. Not despite the tremor, but because of it, because it was real, because it was now, because it was the work of hands that knew their time was limited and chose to keep working anyway. There is a river near the edge of a forest where no one goes anymore. Not because it is dangerous, but because it is so ordinary that no one thinks to visit. It is not a famous river. It does not have rapids or waterfalls or fish that tourists come to catch. It is simply a river. It flows. It does not hold on to the water that has passed. It does not grieve for the rain that fell last week. It does not worry about whether more rain will come. It does not reach downstream to grab the water that has already left. It simply flows. And in that flowing, in that constant, unhurried, releasing, it is always full. It is full, right now, this moment, with water that was not here an hour ago and will not be here an hour from now. Its fullness is made entirely of things that are passing through. Your life is like this river. Your thoughts are like this river. Even the worry that feels so heavy right now, it is water passing through. You do not need to hold it. You do not need to stop the current. You only need to notice that the river has never stopped flowing, and that it has never, even for a moment, been empty. Shunryu Suzuki, speaking the way rivers speak, softly, steadily, without trying to convince, once said, without accepting the fact that everything changes, we cannot find perfect composure. This is what the seamstress found at her machine, with her trembling hands. This is what the daughter found at her mother's bedside, with the pulse beneath her fingers. Not the end of change, not the stopping of the river, but composure within the flowing, steadiness within the moving, peace, not the peace of stillness, but the deeper peace of being at home inside a world that never, ever stops. Anicca. The Pali word for impermanence does not mean that everything you love will be taken away. It means that everything you love is moving, your body is moving, your breath is moving. This very moment is moving into the next one, the way one wave moves into another, without any separation between them. And the mind that lies awake at night, trying to hold everything still, it is fighting the most natural force in the universe. It is trying to stop the ocean from waving. Perhaps, right now, you can feel your breath. Not the idea of your breath, but the actual sensation. The air entering, the air leaving. And if you pay close attention, you might notice that this breath is slightly different from the one before it. A little shallower, a little longer, a little warmer. Each breath is impermanent. Each breath is unrepeatable, and yet each breath is enough. Each breath is complete. It does not need the next breath to justify its existence. It simply comes, does its work, and goes. And the next one arrives without being asked. This is anicca, not as a philosophy, but as a feeling in the body. The breath you are breathing right now will never come again, and that is not sad. That is what makes it yours. Let us rest here. Let the body settle. Let whatever is moving inside you continue to move. The thoughts, the feelings, the small adjustments the body makes as it finds its way towards sleep. You do not need to stop any of it. You only need to let it flow. When you are ready, we will continue together. Not everything needs to be resolved tonight. Not every question needs an answer before morning. Some things can simply be left unfinished, not abandoned, but resting. The way a garden rests in winter, the way a sentence rests at a comma. And that resting, that willingness to leave things incomplete, is its own kind of peace. Take a slow breath, and as you let it out, let this thought settle gently into the room. Not everything needs to be finished tonight. Not every grief needs to reach its end. Not every question needs an answer. Not every broken thing needs to be repaired before you are allowed to close your eyes. There is a kind of peace that comes not from completing, but from allowing. From sitting still inside a life that is, by its very nature, unfinished. And that is where we are going now. On the porch of a house that had been standing longer than anyone on the street had been alive, a woman sat in the dark and listened to the summer night. The porch was made of wood that had been painted and repainted so many times that the layers had built up like rings in a tree, white over green, over blue over a red, that she remembered from childhood. But no one else did. The floorboards creaked when she shifted her weight, a sound so familiar it was almost a greeting. A rocking chair sat beside hers, empty now, its cushion faded, its wood worn smooth on the armrests, where another pair of hands had rested for 37 years. Her husband had died 2 years ago, not slowly, like some departures, not the long, exhausting fade that gives you time to say goodbye. Suddenly, a Tuesday in November, he had been raking leaves in the backyard, and then he was not. The rake was still leaning against the fence when the ambulance came. She had not moved it. It was still there now. 2 years later, the handle grey with weather, the tines rusted, the leaves of 2 autumns piled around its base. The night was warm and soft. Crickets sang their endless, pulsing song from somewhere in the grass. A sound that had been the backdrop of every summer night she had ever lived in this house. Fireflies drifted across the yard in slow, silent arcs, their light appearing and disappearing like small, gentle questions that did not need answers. The moon was nearly full, high and pale, casting the kind of light that makes shadows look like they are resting rather than hiding. A breeze moved through the oak tree at the edge of the yard, and the leaves whispered together the way old friends whisper, not to keep secrets, but because some things are better said softly. She could feel the porch boards beneath her bare feet, smooth and cool, the wood absorbing the night air. A thin blanket lay across her lap, though the evening did not require it. She held it there because it was something to hold. People had told her to move on. They said it kindly. Friends, her sister, the woman at the farmer she was doing. You always get out more, they said. Join a group. Take a class. It has been 2 years. They said it as if grief had an expiration date, as if sorrow was a task on a list that she had simply neglected to check off. And so, in addition to the grief, she carried something else, the belief that she was failing at grief, that she was doing it wrong, that a stronger woman would have moved on by now, would have cleaned out the closet, would have moved the rake, would have stopped setting 2 places at the dinner table and then quietly removing one. She lay awake at night and the mind did its work, not replaying the death, not anymore. Something worse, it replayed her inadequacy. Why are you still sad? What is wrong with you? Everyone else manages. Why can you not manage? One evening, her oldest friend came to sit with her on the porch. This friend was a woman who understood. She had lost her own husband 15 years ago, and she carried that loss the way a tree carries the mark of a lightning strike. It was part of her. It had changed her shape, but she had kept growing. They sat in the rocking chairs. The crickets sang. The friend did not speak for a long time. She did not ask how the woman was doing. She did not suggest activities or groups or classes. She simply sat in the other chair, the empty chair, and let the night be what it was. Everyone says I should be done with this by now, the woman said quietly. Her friend rocked slowly. The chair creaked. Done with what? The sadness, the missing, the... She gestured at the empty yard, the rake, the second place setting. She still put out and still removed. All of it. Her friend was quiet for a long time. A firefly drifted between them, its light pulsing twice before vanishing into the dark. I have been at this for 15 years, her friend said. And I will tell you a secret. You do not finish. No one finishes. The people who say they have moved on have not moved on. They have moved the grief to a different room. It is still in the house. You just stop visiting it every hour and start visiting it every few days. Then every few weeks. Then it becomes like a room at the end of a hallway. You know it is there. You can feel it when you walk past, but you do not need to stand in the doorway every night. Then what do? You stop trying to be done. You stop judging yourself for not being done. You sit here, on this porch, in this night, with this sadness, and you let it be what it is. Not forever, just for tonight. And tomorrow night, you do it again. And eventually, not soon, not on anyone else's schedule, the sitting becomes easier. Not because the sadness leaves, because you stop fighting it. And the fighting, my dear, is what makes it so heavy. The woman sat with this. The moon moved. The crickets sang. Her friend reached over and took her hand. The simple, ancient gesture of one woman telling another, without words, that she was not alone, and she was not broken, and she was not failing. She was simply human, sitting in the dark with something that hurt, and that was allowed. That had always been allowed. After her friend left, the woman stayed on the porch. She did not go inside. She sat in her chair and looked at the empty chair beside her, and did not try to fill it with plans or progress, or the performance of being okay. She let it be empty, and in letting it be empty, she discovered something she had not expected. The emptiness was not as terrible as the fighting. The sadness, when she stopped struggling against it, did not swallow her. It sat beside her, the way her friend had sat beside her. Quietly, without demand, without deadline. Just there. Pema Chodron once wrote, "I cannot overestimate the importance of accepting ourselves exactly as we are right now, not as we wish we were, not as we think we ought to be, right now, as we are." This is what the woman on the porch was learning. Not acceptance as surrender, not acceptance as giving up, but acceptance as the radical act of allowing this moment to be what it is, even when what it is hurts. Tonight, if there is something unfinished in you, a grief that has not reached its end, a question that has no answer, a conversation you will never get to have, a version of your life that you imagined but that did not come true, you do not need to finish it tonight. You do not need to resolve it. You do not need to be at peace with it. You only need to stop punishing yourself for the fact that it is still here. Some things are not meant to be completed. They are meant to be carried, gently, patiently, the way you carry a sleeping child. Not because the child is heavy, but because the child is yours. There is a story about a traveler who walked for many years, searching for peace. He climbed mountains and crossed deserts and visited temples and sat at the feet of teachers who spoke in languages he did not understand. He fasted and prayed and meditated and read every book he could find about the nature of the mind, and still peace eluded him. It was always one more mountain away, one more teacher, one more technique. Finally, exhausted, he came to an old woman sitting beside a road. She was not a teacher. She was not a monk. She was just an old woman, sitting on a stone, watching the clouds. "I have been searching for peace my entire life," the traveler said. "Can you tell me where to find it?" The old woman looked at him. Her eyes were kind and clear, and slightly amused the way the eyes of someone who has stopped looking for things tend to be. "When will you find peace?" she said. She paused. "When you stop looking for it." The traveler stood there. He wanted to argue. He wanted to say that stopping was not the answer, that the search was the whole point, that if he stopped, he would have wasted all those years. But something in the old woman's stillness, something in the way she sat on that stone, as if the stone, and she had come to an agreement long ago, made him sit down beside her. And he discovered, sitting there, doing nothing, looking for nothing, that the peace he had been chasing across mountains and deserts had been sitting in his chest the whole time. Not hidden, not locked, just overlooked, the way you overlook the glasses that are already on your face. In a village where the morning light came in sideways through the mist and turned everything gold, there was a potter who worked in a small workshop at the edge of the river. The workshop was cool and damp, the way all places where clay lives are cool and damp. The floor was packed earth, smooth from years of feet and water and the slow settling of dust. The walls were lined with shelves, rough wooden shelves that bowed slightly under their weight, and on every shelf sat unfinished work. Bowls without rims, vases with one side higher than the other, a teapot whose spout had cracked during drying and been set aside, a plate with a thumbprint still visible in the clay, as if the maker had been called away mid-thought and never returned to smooth it. The potter was old. Her hair was white and pulled back with a piece of string. Her hands were the color of the clay she worked with, a warm, reddish brown that never fully washed away. as if the material had claimed her as much as she had claimed it. She wore an apron so stained and splattered that it had become a record of every piece she had ever made. A map of 40 years written in slip and glaze. A young woman had come to study with her. She was talented and serious, and wanted very much to be excellent. She arrived each morning with her sleeves rolled up and her notebook ready, and she watched the old potter with the intensity of someone who believes that skill can be captured if you only watch closely enough. One morning, the young woman looked at the shelves of unfinished work and asked the question she had been holding for weeks. Why do you keep them? Why not finish them or throw them away? The potter looked at the shelves the way you look at old friends, with fondness and a little amusement and no desire to change them. Why should I? She said. Because they are unfinished, they are not complete. The potter picked up a bowl from the nearest shelf. It was lopsided, with a rim that rose higher on one side than the other, like a hat worn at a rakish angle. She turned it in her hands. This bowl, she said, I started on a morning when the river was flooding. I could hear the water rising while I worked. I left it to go watch. She set it down and picked up another, a small cup with a crack running through it like a river on a map. This one I was making for my daughter's birthday. She came in before I finished and hugged me, and the clay was still wet, and we laughed. She set it down. They are not unfinished. They are exactly what they are. They do not need me to complete them. They only need me to let them be. Ajahn Chah once said, peace is within oneself to be found in the same place as agitation and suffering. It is not found in a forest or on a hilltop, nor is it given by a teacher. Where you experience suffering, you can also find freedom from suffering. The potter understood this. She found peace, not by finishing every piece, but by stopping the war against the unfinished, by letting the shelves hold what they held, and letting her hands do what they could, and letting each day end without requiring completion. She turned to the young woman. Your life, she said gently, is also unfinished. It will always be unfinished. That is not failure. That is what it means to be alive. The only truly finished things in this world are the ones that are dead. The young woman was quiet. She looked at the shelves differently after that, not as evidence of incompleteness, but as evidence of living. Each unfinished piece was a morning, a conversation, a flood, a hug, a moment that mattered more than the bowl. The old teachers had a word for the potter's way of seeing. They called it tathata, sometimes translated as suchness, sometimes as things as they are. It does not mean resignation. It does not mean giving up. It means looking at reality without adding a layer of judgment on top of it. The bowl is lopsided. That is what it is. The grief is still here. That is what it is. The life is unfinished. That is what it is. And in that seeing, in that simple, unadorned acknowledgement, something relaxes. The fight goes out of it, and what remains is not defeat. What remains is peace. Thich Nhat Hanh, who understood fear the way a gardener understands soil, once said, if we can acknowledge our fear, we can realize that right now we are okay. Not perfect, not complete, not without pain, but okay. Right now. In this breath, on this pillow, in this room. You are okay. The unfinished things will still be there tomorrow. They do not need your attention tonight. They can wait. And you, tired, worried, carrying more than you need to carry, you can rest, not because everything is resolved, but because you have decided, just for tonight, to stop requiring resolution as the price of sleep. Perhaps right now, as you lie here, you notice that the body has already accepted what the mind has not. The body is not trying to finish anything. It is not making lists or rehearsing conversations or solving problems. It is simply lying here doing its quiet work, breathing, circulating, resting. The body already knows what the mind is still learning. That this moment is enough. That this night does not need to be anything other than what it is. And what it is, right now, is quiet and dark and yours. Let us rest here for a moment. Let whatever is unfinished remain unfinished. Let whatever is unresolved remain unresolved. It will all still be there in the morning. But right now, it does not need you. And you do not need it. When you are ready, we will continue together beneath all the noise, beneath the thinking and the worrying and the replaying and the planning. There has always been a silence, not the silence of emptiness, the silence of depth, the silence at the bottom of the ocean where no storm can reach. That silence has been waiting for you all night, and we are almost there. Take a slow breath, and as you breathe out, listen. Not to these words, not to the sound of your own thoughts. Listen to what is underneath. Listen to the space between. There is a silence that lives beneath everything. Beneath the worry, beneath the planning, beneath the replaying and the rehearsing, and the endless inner conversation that the mind carries on with itself from morning until night. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of depth. The way the bottom of the ocean is silent, not because there is nothing there, but because the storms that rage on the surface cannot reach that far down. You have been listening to stories tonight about the restless mind, about the weight of holding on, about the kindness you forget to give yourself, about what it means to have enough, about the river of impermanence, about the peace of leaving things unfinished. And beneath all of those stories, beneath every word, every image, every teaching, there has been a silence. It has been here the whole time. You may not have noticed it, the way you do not notice the sky behind the clouds. But it was here. It is here now. Shunryu Suzuki once said, "As long as you have some fixed idea, or are caught by some habitual way of doing things, you cannot appreciate things in their true sense. Instead of gathering knowledge, you should clear your mind. If your mind is clear, true knowledge is already yours." He was not talking about emptying the mind by force. He was talking about noticing that beneath the clutter, the clarity is already there. It has always been there. The mind did not lose it. The mind simply covered it with noise. Imagine the ocean on a night of storm. The surface is wild, waves crashing, foam flying, the water churning with a violence that seems to go all the way down. If you were standing on the shore, you would think the entire ocean was in turmoil. You would think there was no stillness anywhere in all that water. But go deeper, sink beneath the waves, beneath the currents, beneath the places where the light still reaches and the motion still pulls. Go all the way down, 100 feet, 200, 1,000, and there, at the bottom, the water is still. Perfectly still. The sand is undisturbed. The stones are unmoved. The creatures that live there move slowly, as if they have all the time in the world, because down here, they do. The storm is still raging above, but it cannot reach this place. It has never been able to reach this place. Your mind is this ocean. The thoughts are the waves. The worries are the storm. And they are real. You can feel them. You can hear them. They crash and churn and keep you awake. But they are not the whole ocean. Beneath them, beneath the noise, beneath the motion, beneath every thought you have ever had, there is a stillness that has never moved. Not once. Not ever. It was there when you were born. It is here now, and it will be here when the last thought fades. On a small island where the nearest town was a 2-hour boat ride across open water, a woman lived alone in a house made of wood and stone. She had not always lived alone. She had not always lived on the island for 28 years. She had been a school teacher in a city where the traffic never stopped and the neighbors' televisions murmured through the walls. Like a conversation she could almost but not quite understand. She had taught literature to teenagers who mostly did not want to learn it, and she had done it well, and she had loved it, and she had also been slowly coming apart. Not visibly. She showed up every day. She graded papers on time. She smiled in the teacher's lounge. But at night, in her apartment on the 4th floor, the noise followed her inside. Not the noise from outside that she could have closed the windows against. The noise inside her head. The replaying of every classroom interaction. The planning of every lesson. The worrying about students who reminded her of herself at their age. The rehearsal of conversations she might need to have with parents, with administrators, with a version of herself she wished she could become. She left the city at 53, not running from something, walking towards something, or so she told herself. The truth was somewhere in between. She bought the house on the island from a fisherman's widow who wanted to move closer to her grandchildren. The house was simple, 2 rooms, a kitchen, a porch that faced the water. The walls smelled of salt and wood and the particular damp that never quite leaves a house surrounded by ocean. She expected the silence to heal her. That was the bargain she had made in her mind. Leave the noise, find the quiet, and the quiet will fix whatever is broken. But silence, she discovered, is not the same as stillness. The island was quiet, spectacularly quiet. At night, there was nothing but the sound of waves against the rocks. A slow, rhythmic breathing, as if the island itself were sleeping. The wind came and went through the pine trees around the house, carrying the sharp, clean scent of salt and resin. On clear nights, the moon laid a white road across the water, and the stars were so thick they looked like dust. And, still, the mind talked. It talked about whether she had made the right decision. It talked about the students she had left behind. It talked about money and loneliness, and whether the boat would come on time, and what she would do if she got sick. And there was no hospital on the island. It talked and talked and talked, and the silence around her only made the talking louder, the way a single voice sounds louder in an empty room than in a crowd. It took years, not weeks, not months, years. Slowly, the way the island wore the edges off stones, not by force, but by patience, by the simple, repetitive contact of water against rock, day after day after day. She stopped trying to silence the mind. She stopped sitting on the porch, expecting peace to arrive like a package in the mail. She stopped treating silence as a tool and started treating it as a companion. Something that was there, whether she noticed it or not. Something that did not require her attention, or her effort, or her belief. And one night, she could not tell you which night, or what season, or what the moon was doing. She was sitting by the window with a candle burning on the table, and the waves were doing their slow breathing against the rocks, and the wind was moving through the pines, and the mind was talking about something. She could not remember what, something small, something that did not matter, and then it stopped, not because she made it stop, not because she had finally found the right technique or the right posture or the thought to think about thinking. It stopped the way rain stops, naturally, without announcement, as if it had simply finished what it came to do. And in the silence that followed, not the silence outside, which had always been there, but the silence inside, which she had been searching for since she was 23. She heard something, not a sound, a presence. The presence of depth, the way you feel the depth of a lake when you stand at its edge, even if you cannot see the bottom. Something vast and still and ancient and patient that had been there all along, beneath every thought, beneath every worry, beneath every year of noise and teaching and planning and lying awake. It was not dramatic. She did not weep or laugh or fall to her knees. She simply sat by the window and felt the stillness inside her meet the stillness outside, and the two were the same. They had always been the same. She had simply been too busy to notice. In a house on a street where the lamplights made small orange circles on the wet pavement, a grandmother sat in her living room on a Saturday evening and realized, with a small shock, that she was completely alone. This was not usual. Most evenings, something was happening. Her daughter bringing the grandchildren for dinner, a phone call from her sister, a television show she watched while folding laundry, the radio playing oldies while she washed the dishes. There was always noise, always motion, always someone or something that needed her attention. But tonight, everyone was elsewhere. Her daughter had taken the children to a movie. Her sister was traveling. The television was off. She had not turned it on because she had expected someone to call, and no one had. The laundry was done. The dishes were clean. The house was, for the first time she could remember, silent. Not the comfortable silence of a house at rest, the unfamiliar silence of a house with no one in it but her. She sat in the armchair, the old one with the worn velvet and the springs that creaked, and felt the silence press in around her like water. Her bare feet touched the carpet, soft, slightly scratchy, the fibers worn thin in the paths she walked most often. The streetlight came through the curtain and made a pale rectangle on the far wall, and the rectangle shifted slightly whenever a car passed, as if the light itself were breathing. The silence frightened her, not because it was dangerous, but because it was unknown. She had filled her entire life with noise, not deliberately, not consciously, but completely. 67 years of being needed, being busy, being the one who held things together. And now, sitting in this chair with nothing to hold, she felt something she had not felt since she was a child. The sensation of being alone with her own mind. The mind panicked. It reached for tasks. Should she reorganize the kitchen drawers, call someone, turn on the television, check her phone? The mind offered suggestions the way a nervous host offers drinks, rapidly, desperately, anything to fill the space. She did not move. She did not know why. Something held her in the chair, not paralysis, but curiosity. A small, quiet curiosity about what would happen if she just sat here and let the silence be. The mind kept talking. It talked for 10 minutes, 15, 20. It ran through lists and worries and memories and plans. And then, slowly, the way a spinning top slows, wobbles, and finds its center, the mind began to quiet. Not silent, not empty, but quieter, like a room where the conversation has moved from shouting to murmuring to whispers. And in the quieting, she began to hear things she had never heard. The refrigerator, humming its one steady note, the house settling, small creaks and sighs, the sounds of wood and plaster adjusting to the cold, as if the house were a living thing that breathed and shifted in its sleep. And beneath those sounds, softer than all of them, her own heartbeat, steady, faithful, the sound that had been with her since before she had a name. She sat in the dark and listened to her own heart and realized that she had never done this before. In 67 years, she had never sat still long enough to hear the sound of her own body keeping her alive. She had been so busy listening to everyone else, to children and grandchildren and friends and television, and the endless, ceaseless demands of a life fully lived, that she had never listened to herself. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "To dwell in the here and now does not mean you never think about the past or responsibly plan for the future. The idea is simply not to allow yourself to get lost." The grandmother had not been lost in the past or the future. She had been lost in noise, and now, sitting in the silence, she found herself, not a new self, not a better self, but the self that had been here all along, underneath the doing, underneath the giving, underneath the holding together. She smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that comes when you find something you did not know you had lost. The streetlight shifted, the heart beat, the house breathed, and the silence was not empty. It was full. It was full of her. Ajahn Chah said, "Peace arises whenever we let something go." Tonight, the woman on the island let go of searching. The grandmother in the armchair let go of filling, and both of them found the same thing. A silence that was not waiting for them to arrive. It had arrived first. It had always been here. The old teachers called this way of being upekkha, equanimity. It does not mean feeling nothing. It does not mean indifference. It means standing in the center, seeing things come, thoughts, feelings, worries, joys, and seeing them go without being pulled in either direction. The way a mountain watches weather. Rain comes, and the mountain is wet. Sun comes, and the mountain is warm. Storm comes, and the mountain is battered. But the mountain does not chase the sun or flee the storm. It simply stands, and everything passes over it, and it remains. Perhaps, right now, you can feel the silence between your thoughts. Not a large silence, perhaps just a breath wide, a heartbeat deep. But it is there, between the last thought and the next one, in the space where nothing is happening. That space is not empty. It is where you live when you are not thinking about living. It is where rest lives when you stop thinking about rest. And if you simply notice it, if you let your attention fall into that gap, the way a leaf falls into a stream, you may find that the silence is not something you need to create. It is something you return to. And the returning is effortless because you never actually left. You were just too busy to notice you were already home. We have traveled far tonight, through restless minds and heavy burdens and unkind voices, and the question of enough, through rivers and impermanence and unfinished lives, through silence that was always waiting. And now we are coming to the end of our journey together. We have come to the end of our journey tonight. We have traveled a long way together, through the restless mind that would not stop talking, through the weight of the things we hold on to long after they have asked to be set down. We sat with a retired teacher and an old clockmaker and a mother standing in her daughter's empty room. We met a woman in a garden who learned to stop pruning herself with blame, and a fisherman who found that enough was a lake at dawn. We watched a seamstress sew with trembling hands and discovered that impermanence is not the enemy, but the music. We sat on a porch with grief and learned that some things do not need to be finished, and we listened. In a house on an island and in a grandmother's living room, for the silence that was always there. These are not separate teachings. They are one teaching, wearing different clothes, and the teaching is this: you can rest now, not because everything is resolved, not because the mind has finally stopped, but because the stillness you have been searching for was never missing. It was here all along, beneath the noise, the way the ground is always beneath your feet, even when you are too busy walking to feel it. The things we hold on to, the worries, the regrets, the conversations we replay, the versions of ourselves we wish we had been. They are not wrong, they are human, but they are also heavy. And tonight perhaps you have set a few of them down, not forever, just for now. And that is enough. A hand does not need to let go of everything to feel lighter. It only needs to loosen its grip by a fraction, and suddenly there is space. Space for breath, space for rest, space for whatever comes next. And the silence that the woman on the island found after years of searching, the silence that the grandmother found in her own living room on an ordinary Saturday night. It is not something you need to travel to find. It is not at the end of a journey. It is the ground the journey walks on. It is here, in this room, in this breath, between this thought and the next one. It is the space where rest already lives. You do not need to create it. You only need to stop covering it up. And tonight, lying here, you have already begun. There is one more story I would like to share with you before we rest. It is a quiet story, the quietest of the night. It is about a woman you have never met, and yet you know her. You have always known her. She was 71 years old, and she lived alone in a house that she and her husband had bought when they were young and foolish, and certain that love was enough to build a life on. It turned out they were right, though they did not know it at the time. They raised 2 children in that house. They argued in the kitchen, and made up in the garden, and grew old in the bedroom at the end of the hall, where the window faced east and the morning light came in, like a visitor who never needed to be invited. Her husband had been gone 4 years now. Her children called on Sundays. Her neighbors waved from their driveways. She had friends she met for coffee on Wednesdays, and a book club she attended on the first Thursday of every month. She was not lonely exactly. She was accompanied. But at night, when the accompaniment fell away and the house settled into its own breathing, she was alone with her mind. And her mind, like all minds, had things to say. It said, "Did you call the insurance company?" It said, "Your knee is getting worse." It said, "Remember what you said to David at his graduation. That terrible thing. How could you have said that?" It said, "The roof needs fixing." It said, "Are you happy?" It said, "Are you sure?" It said, "Remember your mother's face." It said, "Remember the summer the children were small and the sprinkler broke and they ran through the yard screaming with joy. And you stood at the window and thought, I want to remember this forever." The mind said all of this and more every night in it that changed but never stopped. She had tried everything: warm milk, lavender oil, counting sheep, counting breaths, a white noise machine that sounded like rain that was not quite rain, a sleep podcast hosted by a man with a voice like a warm blanket that she listened to for 3 weeks before she realized she was paying more attention to the man's voice than to sleeping. Nothing worked, not because the methods were wrong, but because she was approaching the problem incorrectly. She was trying to stop the mind. She was trying to silence the thoughts the way you silence an alarm, by reaching out and hitting a button. But the mind is not an alarm. You cannot hit a button. You cannot reach out and stop it. It does not have a button. One night in October, a night so ordinary that she would not have remembered it at all except for what happened. She lay in bed, and the mind began. Insurance, knee, David, roof, mother, sprinkler, and she was tired, not just body tired. Tired of the trying, tired of the warm milk and the lavender and the counting and the fighting. Tired of lying in the dark like a boxer who keeps getting up even though the match is over. So she stopped. She did not stop thinking. She could not do that, and she knew it now. She stopped trying to stop. She stopped fighting the thoughts. She stopped clenching her jaw against them. She stopped squeezing her eyes shut and willing them away. She just stopped. And the thoughts kept coming. Insurance, knee, David. But they came differently now. They came the way clouds come across a sky, moving, shifting, passing through. She was not chasing them. She was not arguing with them. She was not trying to grab them or push them away. She was just lying there, and they were just passing through. And for the first time, she realized that she and the thoughts were not the same thing. She was the sky, they were the clouds, and the sky does not chase its clouds. It simply holds them and lets them go and remains. In that moment, that small, unremarkable moment, in a small, unremarkable bedroom, on a small, unremarkable street, she heard it, the silence, not the absence of thought, but the presence of something deeper, something that had been there her whole life, through the children's laughter and the kitchen arguments, and the morning light, and the grief, and the insurance calls, and the 67,000 nights she had spent in this bed. It had been there like the floor beneath a rug, invisible, unfelt, but holding everything up. She did not know its name. She had never read a Buddhist text. She had never heard of Upekkha, or Anicca, or Metta, or Santuti. She did not know that what she was feeling had been described by teachers for 2,500 years. She only knew that something in her chest had opened, not wide, not dramatically, but like a window opened a crack on a spring morning, just enough to let the air in. The thoughts continued. They would always continue, but they were quieter now, not because they had changed, but because she had stopped amplifying them with resistance. They were just thoughts. Small, human ordinary thoughts in a small, human ordinary mind, and beneath them, around them, holding them, the way the ocean holds its waves, was a peace she had never looked for, and therefore had never failed to find. She pulled the quilt up to her chin. The cotton was cool against her skin, the kind of cool that warms quickly, that becomes the temperature of the body, that stops being separate from you and becomes simply yours. The pillow held her head the way the earth holds a stone, without effort, without complaint, simply because that is what the earth does. The room was dark. The window was a rectangle of slightly lighter dark, where the moon was doing whatever the moon does when no one is watching. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, not yet, just to be here, in this body, in this bed, in this house that still smelled, faintly, of the life she had built in it. And the silence held her the way the night holds the world, gently, completely, without asking anything in return. If this brought you some peace tonight, you are welcome to subscribe for more long-form audio like this, and share it with anyone who could use a slower night. Original commentary, stories, and script, written and produced by Moonlit Dharma. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. And now, as this journey comes to its close, perhaps you notice that your shoulders have already begun to drop. Not because you told them to, they simply did, the way a leaf falls. Not because someone commanded it, but because the time came, and the wind was right, and the branch let go. Your jaw may have softened. There is a place where the teeth meet, upper and lower, pressed together, out of habit, out of tension, out of all the words you held back today. Perhaps that place has opened, just a little, just enough. The lips are parted, the tongue has found a resting place behind the teeth, and it is still. Your hands, wherever they are, beside you, on your chest, curled loosely on the pillow. They are not holding anything. They held so many things today. A phone, a steering wheel, a door handle, a cup, someone's hand, perhaps. But now they are empty, and the emptiness is not lack. It is relief. The fingers are heavy, the palms are warm, and the hands are doing what hands do when they are finally, fully at rest. They are open. Your breath is not something you need to manage tonight. It is coming and going on its own, the way it has been coming and going since the moment you arrived in this world. You do not need to deepen it, or slow it, or count it. It knows what to do. It has always known, and tonight, you can trust it, the way you trust the ground to be there when you take a step, the way you trust the dawn to come after the dark. The weight of your body is sinking, slowly, steadily, the way a stone sinks through warm water, into the mattress, into the pillow, into whatever is holding you tonight. You are being held. You have been held all along, by the bed, by the room, by the quiet, faithful gravity that has never once let you float away, no matter how unmoored the mind felt, and your eyes, if they are not already closed, are growing heavy. Not with exhaustion, with permission. The permission to stop looking, to stop searching, to stop scanning the dark for answers. The answers will still be there in the morning. But tonight, the eyes can rest, and when they close not against the world, but into it, into the dark, into the quiet, into the same silence that the woman on the island found, that the grandmother in the armchair found, that the woman in the ordinary bedroom found on the ordinary night when she stopped fighting and let the stillness rise to meet her. The night continues outside your window. The moon is doing its slow, silent work, pulling tides, casting light, turning the world silver and shadow. Somewhere, an owl is sitting on a branch, watching the dark, with the patience of something that knows that stillness is not the absence of life, but the deepest form of it. Somewhere, a river is moving through a valley, carrying leaves and light, and the reflection of stars on its surface, going nowhere in particular, arriving everywhere at once. And you are here, in this room, in this bed, in this breath. You have done enough today. You have carried enough. You have thought enough. And now the night is offering you the one thing it has always offered, the chance to set it all down. Not to solve it, not to fix it, not to understand it, just to rest, just to let the body be heavy, and the mind be soft, and the silence be enough. The stories will be here if you need them. The teachings will be here. The stillness will be here. They are not going anywhere. They have nowhere to go. They are as patient as the moon. And you do not need to go anywhere either. You are already where you need to be. You have always been where you need to be. The overthinking mind that brought you here tonight, that restless, beautiful, exhausting mind that swings from branch to branch and never finds a place to land, it is quieter now. Not silent, but quieter. And that is enough. That has always been enough. So rest now. Let the night hold you. Let the silence carry you. Let the breath come and go without your help. And know that you are safe, and you are held, and you are home. You have always been home. You just forgot for a little while in all the noise. But the noise is fading now. And what remains, what has always remained, is this quiet, this dark, this breath, this peace. And it is yours. It was always yours. And it will be here, waiting, whenever you need it again. Softly, gently, like moonlight on still water, like the silence between two heartbeats, like the sound of your own name, spoken by someone who loves you, in a voice so quiet it could only be heard by someone who had finally at last stopped trying to listen.